Welcome to today's Energy Central webcast entitled The Utility Perspective, Navigating the Evolving Regulatory Landscape. A few housekeeping notes we'd like to mention. We acknowledge that given the higher demands on internet connections where many are working from home, technical issues may be more pronounced. If for any reason we find the need to restart the event, we invite you to click your same link to rejoin us. If you cannot get adequate sound from your computer speakers, you may dial into the audio portion using the telephone number listed in the right-hand panel of the interface under the audio section. We invite you to submit your questions at any time using the interface on your screen. I'm happy to turn the floor over to our first speaker, Jim Shields with Black & Veatch, to kick things off. Jim, welcome to the event. You have the floor.
Thanks, and just want to thank everybody for joining today. Pretty interesting topic. It's of note, in our industry, anyways, around how we go about justifying investment plans. But happy to be joined today with some folks we've worked with and folks that we've got to know over the last couple of years. And just wanted to introduce those folks. I'll introduce myself, and I'll turn it over to them to introduce themselves. Jim Shields, Black & Veatch. Spent most of my time working for electric utilities in the Midwest. Working my way through engineering and got into leadership in the last decade or so. Spent a lot of time with asset management, investment planning, and taking those plans and working them through the regulatory process. But glad to be here, glad to be with Black & Veatch and working with this great panel. Andrew, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Jim. Andrew Wells. I'm Associate General Counsel with Duke Energy, and I've been working in the utility regulatory space for about 10 years and have had the opportunity to work with Black & Veatch and Jim on a few filings in the Midwest, and I'm excited to be here today. Thank you.
Jason?
Hi, yeah, my name is Jason Jones, and I work for the Public Service Company of New Mexico as their Director of Generation Engineering. I've been in working for a utility for the past 23 years, and I'm happy to share my experience and perspective on this panel.
Thanks, Jason. David?
Thanks, Jim. Hi, everyone. I'm the pipeline practice lead for Copperleaf, and I've been working with utilities and primarily gas transmission and distribution utilities in the United States for the last 3-4 years. And prior to that, spent about a decade in the upstream energy industry as well. So happy to be here today.
Thanks. So we wanted to start out just talking about real briefly here this partnership that Black & Veatch and Copperleaf have. And I think it's a really interesting partnership because we complement each other. So from a Black & Veatch perspective, we're a company that's over 100 years old. We have utility industry solution expertise all the way from grid mod on the distribution side and then up through the generation, both in electric and gas, water as well. But we have a strong practice in asset risk, asset management that we bring to the table that complements the Copperleaf tool. Also, investment value identification. This is being able to wring out benefits from these investments. And then we also provide a regulatory filing support function as well. And I think that complements Copperleaf in the sense that they're the software solution, right? They have the engine behind being able to take all these diverse investments and being able to do a cost-benefit analysis on it. But the beauty of it is it's an enterprise software platform, and it drives down to value-based decision-making. They're able to quantify values for value, and we'll talk about that here in a bit. And then really another strength of the Copperleaf tool is this optimization functionality. Got this whole host of investments. How do we optimize that? What are the constraints around it, and how is that built? And David will speak to that a little bit later in the presentation. But wanted to note the complementary effect of this partnership. So wanted to run through just a couple trending regulatory and utility objectives. You're probably familiar with all of these, but just wanted to get the trendy ones out in front of everybody. Decarbonization, everybody's talking about it. A lot of folks move in that direction. The challenge here in investment planning is what's that mean, actually? If we take carbon-based energy sources off the system, where do we put them back on the system? And what kind of investments need to take place on the distribution system, the transmission system, and how do you determine where that goes? So just trying to frame that up a little bit. Modernization is, it ties into all this, right? We historically run a system that has some age to it. And then, we've got aging infrastructure with us all the time. So when we upgrade old equipment to new equipment, we can modernize in that fashion. And then modernization also means if we're going to have all kinds of different distributed energy resources around our system, do we have the systems and the processes, and can that system handle that? So a pretty broad definition there. Resiliency. We view resiliency as just one component of reliability. Reliability is, how often and how long do outages occur on electric systems? And resilience is this function around how fast can you restore outages on systems. So just wanted to clarify that from our view. Environmental and social governance. What we're trying to do here is demonstrate values being generated for all stakeholders. David's going to touch on this a little bit later on how we can model this and how we can demonstrate that ESG principles are being applied to investment planning. And then lastly, prosumers. This is where actually customers are generating electricity. And then what does that mean on our system? What reinforcements need to take place? What controls and what regulation is around that? So just want to touch on some trending objectives here. I'd like to throw a couple questions over to Andrew and Jason. First of all, Andrew, when you look across your jurisdictions, can you talk briefly about which one of these are being emphasized more than the other, and how do you guys adjust to that when it comes to investment planning?
Yeah, thank you, Jim. As y'all are probably aware that are attending the webinar today, Duke Energy has a pretty wide service territory from the Midwest to Florida to the Carolinas, and specifically in the Midwest and in Indiana, the regulatory focus has been primarily on that resiliency piece that Jim mentioned, with consideration to decarbonization, modernization, more as secondary factors, the resiliency and the reliability of the grid being the driver, with acknowledgement these other items are occurring at the same time. So, we've put an emphasis on that and tried to quantify those benefits and put those priorities at the forefront. But that's not the same. I mean, the geographic diversity in our enterprise-wide organization causes some of these other components to have more priority than they would in other locations. So, we've been able to try to, quantify those priorities as is appropriate depending on what jurisdiction we're operating in or presenting a portfolio to that commission.
And Jason, when you consider your area, any emphasis here?
Yeah, so a few years ago, our legislature actually passed the Energy Transition Act, which gives us timelines for decarbonization, and that deadline being 2045. And then our company actually improved on that deadline and made the decarbonization a priority for 2040. All of this while keeping the system resilient. And then we have a very large behind the meter presence. About 10% of our load peak load is generated behind the meter. And so balancing the decarbonization with what the prosumers are doing while keeping the grid resilient is all very much a priority for us. That being said, the other two bubbles are also occurring with ESG and modernization, but definitely the decarbonization and the prosumer are top of our minds right now.
Yeah, and I think what we want to emphasize here is that with these objectives, and there's more than these, obviously, we need to start thinking in terms of tools and processes that allow us to capture all the benefits in programs where investments could be made, and then be able to demonstrate to all stakeholders how we derive those benefits. So one thing we wanted to maybe touch on here is the complexity of that, right? If we look about how business was done historically, relatively few objectives, which generated a little larger amount of solutions, and I don't have them all listed here. I've kind of simplified this, and then the analysis process associated with that. But if we think about the new world we live in, there's more objectives. We've touched on a few, but we've listed a couple here. And another thing that's relatively new is the pre-approval of investments, right? You've got to put a case together and then demonstrate that the investments are worth investing in. But what that means is there's several different more solutions to that, which expands the complication of how you go about analyzing that. And if we just look at clean energy for a minute here, right? That's an objective, but the solutions could be energy storage, renewables. I'll throw in here, there's benefits associated with clean energy around volt bar optimization for demand reduction, conservation, energy reduction. And I'll even throw in here that clean energy can derive benefits from installing self-healing networks, in the sense that the more distributed energy we have on the distribution system, you got to have access to the distribution system to allow that energy to get up on the grid. And so self-healing teams add benefit to accessibility to DERs, along with all those historical benefits of reducing CMI and such. So the point here is this, is that as the number of solutions increase, and underneath each one of these solutions are candidate projects to be considered, the tool and being able to build all of these benefit factors has to be able to take all those into consideration, do cost benefit analysis, be able to optimize on what the objectives are from those programs, and then derive a benefit cost analysis that justifies the investment. And I think that's where this notion about bringing expertise in from the industry and leveraging a software tool like Copperleaf really enables that to take place. So maybe Andrew, when you think about the investment plan you guys put together, can you talk about the complexity of it and the magnitude of it, maybe some of the results around the BCA and how you guys leverage that in the case?
Yeah, sure. So we ultimately proposed a $2 billion T&D investment plan over a 6-year period in Indiana. We had 17 transmission programs, around 18 distribution programs. Within those programs were hundreds of projects, as you can imagine. And we needed a way to analyze those projects and provide a benefit cost analysis to the regulator. And when we started developing the plan early on, we had over $4 billion worth of candidate projects that were being considered. And so we needed a way to, for lack of a better phrase, grade the projects, score them, and decipher it down into a portfolio that is what we ultimately presented to the commission, and had a quantified benefit cost analysis that was strong and made sense.
Yep, thanks, Andrew. And we wanted to know here also during this process, even though the benefit cost analysis may not turn out, to indicate investment, there may be other qualitative benefits that are more difficult to quantify that would still make that project viable.
Right.
If we think about like 4 kV systems, sometimes that doesn't work out as well. But there are compelling reasons to go ahead and convert that 4 kV system. And I think, Andrew, you made that that point in one of the cases here.
Right. Yeah. We had a project in particular that you alluded to in our portfolio, Jim, that was converting our 4 kV system in Indiana, and just due to the nature of our service territory, it didn't score particularly high on the benefit cost ratio, but it obviously made sense to convert the system or upgrade the system. We didn't want to leave rural areas of the service territory or small pockets of customers with an antiquated system. So, that was incumbent upon us to tell the story to the regulator. But I think it also added a little bit of authenticity to the benefit cost analysis that we put forward and the process that we went through with Black & Veatch and Copperleaf. It added that authenticity to the commission to say, hey, look, we know this project makes sense. We think you believe this project would make sense, regardless of how it scores. But we're showing you this does not meet that it is underwater, and that just lends credence to all of our other projects that came through with much higher BCR scores.
Yep, great point. So when we look at the process about putting investment plans together, we kind of look at it in this way, and that is really providing or developing a process and being able to provide line of sight all the way from the cost benefit methodologies and how that is done, aggregated into an investment plan, right? And then the utility looks at it and they develop and present and align all those aligned objectives. And then it's submitted to the regulator for approval in their review. So what we're trying to do here from a large perspective is to be transparent and to create clear line of sight from objectives all the way down to the costing and how we derive benefits from each one of those programs. So sort of at a high level, the process we go through here is when we work with clients is we want to first of all get the investment plan objectives in alignment, right? And utilities have investment plans already, and so we bring those in under the existing investment program. And then when we talk about these new objectives and how we bring solutions to those new objectives, those have to be identified and defined. And then we've got this candidate list of programs. And then we do a little bit of analysis to say, just a high level analysis, say, which ones should we really focus on here and start developing a little more detail around. And that's the finalized list of programs and their scope. And then the second part of our process here is really the plan development. And at a high level, what we do is we take those programs and we start identifying all the potential benefits. And then we start mapping those benefits to all of those programs. Like I indicated earlier on when we talked about clean energy and how we can derive benefits from a self-healing network back to clean energy. And it's that tie through that benefit mapping that allows us to derive those benefits for those programs. And so once that's done is really when a lot of the hard work begins, right? You've got to find, we turn to our planning and operations folks to do this, but we have to identify candidate projects across all of those different programs. And then Andrew alluded to this was literally hundreds of projects, maybe close to 1,000 projects into the multi-billion-dollar estimate range, right? And so those all become candidate projects that compete for funding in the benefit cost analysis capability and the optimization capability within the Copperleaf tool. And so really there's two components to this. These are planning and operations projects. But when we think about investment planning and asset management, there will always be aging infrastructure on our system. We add assets to the system and the utility tries to extract as much life out of those assets. And so there's the component here called asset risk analysis, and it takes all the asset register of all the assets on the system, and we do a risk analysis, and then we're able to take that risk and turn that risk reduction into dollars, right? And so that's the second component here. And then once we get that built, once we get that data set built, we do that BCA analysis. And what we look at is we're able to take at a program level and a project level and do a BCA analysis on it. And then what we learn sometimes along the way is that some programs don't make sense. So those programs are removed from consideration. The other piece we want to note here is, the rigor around the cost estimates. The benefit cost ratio is essentially a function of those two things. We're deriving benefits, but some emphasis around how those cost estimates are made is important as well. And what we recommend for clients is that we use an AACE cost estimate rigor around that. And closer in time, you probably use a higher cost estimate level, and then later in time you use a lower cost estimate level. Because in the end, this is an iterative process that you can update on an annual basis. So at that point, it really goes into the program project optimization, and then the final plan is developed, and then we start working with the regulatory teams. At this stage, the utilities regulatory team and their legal teams, while being involved all the way along the plan process here, they start giving direction to the plan development team on how the data will be presented, how the evidence will be shown, and who will be witnesses and what their topics are going to be. So one last slide here. What we're trying to emphasize here is that there's an increased expectation around this benefit cost analysis. And this partnership we've created with Copperleaf, I think we can extract and get to a best practice around that. So legacy-wise, not a whole lot of benefit cost analysis, a lot of risk reduction in there. We have seen, and we've worked with clients where not all of the programs were monetized for benefits, only portions of it were, but the overall benefit of the entire plan was greater than the cost. But what we're emphasizing here is that the best practice in the industry would be to do the hard work and take the time to develop a benefit framework, value framework around each one of your programs, and that you can apply to each one of the projects under that program, so that the BCAs can be done at a project level. And from there, we can start talking about how do we optimize that entire investment plan based on constraints and which objectives are emphasized more than others. And lastly, what we want to emphasize here is that when we put this plan together and we can index along with geographical areas where investments are being made, and that'll allow us to demonstrate that the ESG principles are being applied in the investment planning process. And Dave will talk about that a little more here in a minute. At the end of the day, everybody has a job to do here, right? And so the commissions are put in place to review and approve to make sure that investments that utilities are making are prudent. And they bear the burden of being able to make the determination that the costs are justified by the incremental benefits of the investment plan, right? And so the utility takes the burden on being able to put those investment plans together, derive those benefits, demonstrate those benefits, and present that to the regulator to make sure that they have all the evidence they need to make this determination. And at the end of the day, this is the process we go through. The complications is that there's a lot more objectives, which derives a lot more solutions, and the magnitude and the complexity of doing that is we're able to do that through the Copperleaf tool and the work that Black & Veatch does in deriving those benefits. So just real briefly here, what we do is we concentrate on those objectives, right? We say, let's start there and let's work our way back to defining the programs. Let's work our way the other way, the cost factors and the benefit factors and the value models. And then what we're doing here is we're just creating line of sight across all of those things to be presented in the case. And this is just an example of how we tell that story on a storyboard. It's at a high level view, but we actually list out all of those cost factors, all those benefits, and then we define what those value models are. And then that's the beginning of the story. And it gives a high level view of how we arrived at each one of those. So I'm going to turn it over to David here to dive a little more deeper into how the Copperleaf tool enables us to do that.
Thanks, Jim. So within the investment planning process, we see these two groups, collaborating together, and they can have very different views, even though they work at the same place. So on one side, you have the planning group, the operational teams, and they're your subject matter experts. They have the investment data, the risk assessments, the cost reports, and the nuts and bolts of building that plan. On the other side, you have the executive team, and they're focused on strategic objectives and outcomes and organizational KPIs, as well as any regulatory considerations that need to be brought in. So the Copperleaf tool is really a single source of truth for these two teams to collaborate together and build a plan and use the value framework composed of value models to ultimately drive the cost and benefit analysis that Jim alluded to in the previous slides. So in Copperleaf, the business case inputs from the planning team are transformed into values through the value models endorsed by the executive team. And this linkage allows the planning team to understand the big picture while giving the executive team the confidence that the business case analysis is indeed aligned with corporate objectives and regulatory requirements. And, next slide, please, Jim. So as I mentioned, the value framework is really a highly collaborative process that touches every part of an organization. It requires a clear line of sight mapping of the benefits and risk involved with each investment or program, as Jim outlined earlier. As trusted partners, Black & Veatch and Copperleaf help utilities build a value framework that consists of a robust collection of benefit cost analysis models that are personalized for the type of capital investment that's being undertaken. And these models are directly used in capital planning and scenario analysis to demonstrate due diligence and rigor to internal and external stakeholders that the proposed capital plan is hitting the right value measures or the right outcomes that aligns with corporate objectives and regulatory requirements. So on this,
Andrew,
sorry, go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, Andrew, can you talk a little bit about this Copperleaf tool is a tool, right? And utilities in general use tools to analyze systems and finances and stuff. Can you talk a little bit about how you approached the regulator about the use of the tool and it being new and being able to kind of describe it and get comfortable with it?
Sure. Yeah. If we take a step back in Indiana, where the commission is required to make a determination under statute that the benefits of a plan proposal outweigh the costs, and the question then is, what does the utility put forward to allow the commission to make that determination? So in first generation plans about 10 years ago, it was a lot of aging infrastructure, risk reduction. There was a lot of analysis that went into that, but the story kind of tells itself, right? You're taking decades old equipment off and replacing it with new. And in our second generation plan, there was a emphasis on some of those factors that Jim had shown on an earlier, Jim, that you showed on an earlier slide. And so the benefit cost analysis needed to be a little more detailed and a little more robust, and Copperleaf allowed us to present that story. We met with the commission staff long before filing and walked them through what factors we were considering, what was driving the plan, what the objectives were, the value measures into, and value models framework. Back a few slides ago when you were talking about that line of sight, we're able to tell that story with the tool, walking, through those steps. And, we met with interested interveners and did the same thing. And, the nice thing that I appreciated, coming from the legal perspective, was we were able to show the process and the value measures, those metrics, those, that granular data, to the extent, those things were being asked, we were able to, tell the story. This is, this project gets quantified this way. This project is being quantified that way. And so that allowed us to really, tell that story with the regulator and the interveners.
Yeah, thanks. Jason, I know you guys are early on in the process here, but can you speak to maybe some of the challenges associated with getting in this position? This is a lot of work to get here, but just maybe some of the challenges.
Yeah, certainly. So one of the first challenges is sitting down with, I guess my role in P&M is turning all these, regulations and visions and whatnot into tangible actions and investment plans, but certainly getting internal agreement on how to value something, what types of projects are valued, how they're valued, and we're a 100-year-old utility. We're vertically integrated. We have separate generation, transmission, distribution departments, and certainly the back a few slides, you're showing the new options of technologies and several of those bleed over to different departments. So even breaking down the internal silos and getting the different departments together to talk about a single project to agree on what it's worth to the consumer or to the customer. Our ultimate goal is to bring the most value to the customer, and it's working through that process to ensure that happens. It's not an easy undertaking. You characterized that correctly.
Yeah. Yeah, David, thanks for letting us interject there. But what really makes us enabled is the tool, but there's a lot of work behind that. So you done on this slide, David?
Yes, I'm good for this one. Yeah, so this next slide is just an example of a value framework, and you can see a list of different models that's been brought into this framework to serve a specific purpose, as Jim and Andrew and Jason alluded to, really looking at the type of programs and investments that you're trying to value and working collaboratively with the different teams internally and externally to get to that consensus of what should be the value outcomes of a given project or capital investment. So depending on the type of project, you may select a particular type of model. In this case, we have an example here shown just to illustrate how different value frameworks can achieve and accomplish different things. It comes down to the models that you build within the tool, and it's really personalized and bespoke to the utility's unique operating environment, regulatory jurisdictions, and the assets that they're trying to optimize. So next slide, and this is one of the last slides from me. So just to highlight the three key components of the Copperleaf tool from a business case standpoint is looking at risk, benefits, and costs. So risk captures the value in avoiding undesirable outcomes. The benefits capture the value of desirable outcomes, such as cost savings, for example. And the cost is the dollar spent to construct or complete a project. So in this example, we can see that this particular program assessment has value measures across these three different categories. There's risk reduction that is being achieved by this investment. There's financial and environmental benefits as well. And of course, there's the underlying cost of actually doing the work. And this allows utilities to have essentially a scorecard, a snapshot of what the business case is for a given program and how it can dynamically change if you're taking out assets, if you're increasing or decreasing scope, or you're deferring the work or accelerating the work, depending on what kind of constraints that you have.
All right, sorry about that, David.
No, all good, Jim. And the last slide I have is just to touch a little bit on the ESG kind of mega trend that we're seeing and a lot of the clients that we work with across the continent. So what we are seeing is some of the public utility commissions are emphasizing more on is to consider the level of risk that's impacting different communities. And that's looking at overlays of census tracts, of different types of screening tools in order to see what the underlying communities look like and what type of risk levels are currently impacting them today. So with a tool like Copperleaf, you're able to then see, based on your proposed program, what the spend levels are across these communities and what the value of the risk mitigation is specifically to disadvantaged communities versus non-disadvantaged communities, and what kind of benefits they can expect based on the plan that's being put forward. So in Copperleaf, we're not looking to be prescriptive about how you consider these strategies. It's more identifying how your spend levels currently exist today. And if you're in a jurisdiction where this needs to be considered a little bit more acutely, then you can start seeing how different constraints or different funding levels are able to divide the resources more proportionally to achieve a fair outcome to all the communities and service areas that the utility operates in.
Great, thanks, David. Jason, can you kind of spend a little time talking about how ESG principles are being applied in your jurisdiction?
Yeah, so ESG is important to our company as well, and even I guess some recent filings. We just well, actually, pretty much all of the recent filings, the questions are asked. You know, which communities are benefiting the most, or which communities are impacted the most, and kind of through, you know, we're kind of early on figuring this out, kind of like with other utilities, exactly how we're gonna how we're doing this, but we're looking at circuit level analysis and using Copperleaf to kind of help answer those questions more easily than dedicating people to go do studies.
Perfect. You know, the benefit of Copperleaf and building this database of projects and organizing investment plans in this fashion is, first, you can demonstrate where funding is going, and secondly, you can readjust the plan. You can re-optimize your plan based on, you know, circumstances. So the flexibility is built in here. You got to do the hard work at the beginning and on the groundwork, but it enables you know, that story to be told. So like I mentioned earlier, once we get through this process, we're at the final plan. We kind of turn this over to the utilities regulatory teams and their legal teams, and then they start putting together, you know, what's going to be presented, how it's going to be presented. But what we want to emphasize here is if you go through this hard work and you build these value models and you socialize it and everybody's on board, regulatory filings become less dramatic, you know, less hard to do, I guess, in the sense that you're just doing business this way, right? And so it takes a long while to get there, but Andrew's smiling because you know, it is a painstaking process to go through. But if you build your business processes around this, that eases the pain around there. So we wanted to conclude here. Really, I'm not sure where we're at on time. Wanted to conclude here and just really run through a list of what the capabilities of a investment plan should entail, right? And it's kind of a summary of what we've gone through here, but you know, when we think about aligning the regulatory and utility objectives together, that's front end work. It makes sure everybody's going and selling in the right direction. And then the investment plan is aligned with the objectives, right? That's the plan development part. That's aligning or mapping your benefits to each one of the objectives. And then what we're emphasizing here is that if you can get a benefit cost analysis done at the project level, it allows so many more demonstrations on the rigor around the plan, how you optimize the plan, and all the stories you can tell around that. The other thing we think should be demonstratable in an investment plan is that a host or a large candidate project pool was created where those dollars, that funding was actually competed for. Now I've got on here non-discretionary projects. Some of these are, we refer to them as must-dos, but there's no reason why we can't add, identify the value to those non-discretionary projects and identify that in the investment plan. For example, ground line treatment of poles and replacement of poles. Utility's been doing that for years, a very long time. They're going to continue to do that because it's the right thing to do. We would consider that non-discretionary, but we can still derive the value out of doing that. Again, how is the plan optimized? Why were the constraints applied the way they were? And if we can monetize the value at each one of the project level, then we can roll that up to the program level and now start talking about benefit cost analysis at a higher level in the presentation. And like we just talked about, being able to identify and demonstrate funding levels at each one of the underserved communities and environmental justice areas. And the last piece here is around cost. We really do think it's important to demonstrate that enough effort was put into the cost estimates that the variation in those costs over time are within the range of what the benefit cost ratio would be. So kind of like the capabilities of a good investment plan here. Just want to give one example real quick here on what that means, right? So if we can demonstrate at the end of this process that a pool of projects were considered, and based on the benefit cost analysis, a smaller pool of projects are being proposed in the investment plan. And if we can take it one step further and say, at the program level and at the project level, we can identify where those benefits are coming from. That's a pretty good story to tell. And it allows us also to make adjustments to that as we're working our way through the investment plan, making sure that the investment plan emphasizes those things that need to be emphasized. And this is just one illustration of how we can do that. At the end of the day, when everything's said and done, the investment plan is really a balancing act. It's a balancing act between safe, reliable, clean, affordability, and making sure that it's equitable to all the stakeholders. So wanted to end on that note as far as comments go. I think we got some questions that we can field here. Jamin, if you want to run through those and pose them to the panelists.
Yeah. Thank you all of you for your insights on the process. It really helps. There are a few very interesting questions. The first question that is coming, I think a couple of them aligned with that, is can you consider the non-financial benefits along with the financial benefits to determine the value? And this will help in improving the overall BCA. So if you have some insights on that.
David, you want to swing at that first?
Yeah, sure. So I think one of the very common non-financial benefit that we value is really looking at risk mitigation, because you're avoiding something that may not have occurred, that may not have hit your bottom line yet, but you're making a judgment and a forecast based on your available data, what the value of that risk, of mitigating that risk is, avoiding that negative outcome. So we have essentially all these different value measures on a common scale so that financial and non-financial benefits can be on a equal playing field, have equal weighting, or you can look at weighting certain types of value measures higher compared to other measures. So that's one component that I see that's non-financial, Jim, that comes up right off the bat.
Yeah, that's a good one. Thanks, David. And the concept of monetizing risk reduction is something that would have to be developed and articulated to stakeholders, but it is a big part of the investment plan. Any other questions, Jamin?
Yes, the next one that we are getting is And there is an increasing challenges for asset valuation in quantifying the value of flexibility in managing integration of renewable generation, and specifically how it performs in operations. How are you addressing this in your framework? So the question is around flexibility, integration of renewables. Can those be included?
Yes. I think value models around that. And I think, it starts back up at the identifying those benefits like we discussed earlier. We rely on our engineering groups and our operations folks to define those programs, and then being able to tie all those benefits across all those programs back to that objective, right? And I think this, what we're saying here is the objective here is decarbonization. Where will the energy resources be, and how does that affect the system that it's on, either the transmission or the distribution system? And what investments do you have to make to accommodate that? And to help tell the story on the investment is you got to be able to tie all those disparate benefits across all those programs back together. I don't know if that answers the, but that was my attempt at it. David, you want to take a swing at that one?
I think the flexibility, the value of flexibility is really something that, again, comes from the engineering team and the planning team as they're looking and evaluating the projects, right? So if managing integration of new generation capacity could mean that investing in a project today can lead to cost savings into the future. So financial benefits through reduced CapEx spending that we may need to incur down the road if we took a different decision today in our plan. So that's one way we could bring that into the framework. Again, it really relies on the operational inputs and having that line of sight on what type of benefits and value there is in increasing flexibility in the system and the grid.
Jason, you're going through that process right now, right? Trying to identify those programs.
We are, and what I would say is it's not easy. There's not necessarily in an encyclopedia you can go open and say this is the value of a flexible resource, because there's a lot of different attributes, associated with where it is, how it's used, what's the current state of the system, and so forth. When we're looking at evaluating those within Copperleaf, though, it's a matter of trying to capture all those different variables and assign some level of value to them. And so as the portfolio changes or some other, the requirements change, we're able to adapt with that, with those changes. But yeah, we shut down one of our coal plants just a couple of years ago. We're replacing everything with solar and batteries and wind, and it's, I mean, part of the reason that there's webinars like this is because I think there's what we're dealing with is very challenging without easy answers, and that's probably not adequate, but that's kind of our experience.
Thanks.
Thanks for that. We have got next question for David. David, the map that you showed for ESG, are you showing that as the official environmental justice communities as defined by federal regulations, or is there something else that you are presenting?
Yeah, so that example was actually from the California environmental screen and the disadvantaged and vulnerable communities overlay. So it's at the state level where this map was borrowed from. And so I'm not sure if the federal regulations had picked that up, explicitly, but that's certainly what certain states are looking at in terms of the census data that's available to them.
Thanks, David. The next one that we have is, how do you balance the benefits to current customers versus the cost to the future customers? With aging assets and past investment patterns, In some cases, the current customers are reaping benefits largely funded many years in the past while loading cost onto future customers in the name of affordability today.
Yeah, that is a great question, and probably more associated with rate making in the structure of rates. I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer that one, Jamin.
Well, Jim, let me take a crack at that. I don't know if I'm going to answer this question directly because it seems like you said a little more rate making, but I would say that as we were putting together our plan and our proposal, we're looking at obviously, like you showed in your PowerPoint, all of the benefits, the factors that we're driving from one of those earlier slides that had the 5 factors on them. You know, a few of those are driving our plan. We're getting metrics and quantifying the benefits, but the plan for us was presented with a benefit cost analysis for the entire plan. And the plan was not focused solely in one area of the service territory. It was across the whole service territory. So the portfolio was a benefit to the entire Duke Energy Indiana grid, which benefits all of our customers and not necessarily a specific category of customers. And so customers that come that are currently connected to our grid will reap the benefits, and the customers that come in the future will reap the benefits. And I would say the customers that have been here for a long time have benefited from our excellent performance over the past decades.
Thanks, Andrew. The next one that we have is, how does the corporate financial strategy interact or influence the asset investment plan?
Yeah, I'll take that one. So there's probably up in the strategy phase a step that needs to be considered, right? And that is to what extent do we want to press the envelope on affordability? And really that can be determined on the front end, right? And the magnitude of the investment plan can be settled, and that's one of the constraints when we put the investment plan together. We really recommend that taking place at the front end, and through the rates department and through your financial departments, you can kind of tweak that in there and find out what the funding level would be and what the impact on rates would be, you know, over the long haul. Great to know that on the front end, so that when we start running the investment plans and the optimizations and the constraints there, we have some guidance on what the magnitude is going to be. And so maybe indicate this in some jurisdictions, we see that affordability is built into the statute, right? There's, you know, go to often to get all these objectives completed, submit a plan to us, but let it go above this level from a rate impact perspective.
Thank you, Jim. The next question that we have is, was this BCA approach implemented proactively or rather due to the regulator's requirement? If proactive, do you anticipate the regulators will at some point require this BCA approach for investment justification?
Well, I'll give you my opinion, and it's just that, an opinion. You know, when you do good work and it's received well, the expectation of doing work going forward has just increased.
Yeah.
And Andrew, you might be able to talk to that. Andrew, you might be able to talk to that a little bit around, you know, first phase, second phase, expectations growing over time.
I would say, you know, as I mentioned earlier, in Indiana, the commission is tasked with making a determination that the costs of, or excuse me, the benefits of a proposal outweigh the costs. Now, that doesn't necessarily require the utility to do a certain BCA approach or not, but it obviously seems to be appropriate under that regulatory framework, right? And I would say, Jim mentioned a minute ago that if you do this, it makes the regulatory process super easy, which I would beg to differ. But what it does do is it makes it easy to tell the story, right? Because you're able to, really support your projects, your portfolio in a robust way with this BCA approach. And so the regulatory process in and of itself is just as hard as it's always been, but it really gave us a comfort level on the support we had behind our projects to demonstrate that they were very meaningful and would lead to benefits to customers on the Duke Energy Indiana system.
Yeah. And Jason,
Jamin,
yeah.
Jamin, I think we're down to the last 4 minutes here. Did we want to go to the survey?
I think the survey link is broken, so probably we can skip the survey part. And if Jason wants to provide his thoughts on that last question.
Yeah, and I'm not in the regulatory department, but I'm not aware of the same statute in New Mexico that Andrew was talking about in Indiana. However, even recently, our regulators have been asking for cost-benefit analysis for different types of investments. However, I would offer internally just balancing, our company's not able to fund everything every year, and so just even balancing the internal portfolio and list of projects on what brings the most value is one of the primary reasons that we're going down this path and bringing more rigor to our cost-benefit analysis, if that makes sense. But certainly I can see where Jim says there's no good work that goes unpunished. And I feel in New Mexico that might be a true statement as well. Although I'm not in I'll throw out the disclaimer again, I'm not in the regulatory department. So.
Yeah, and if you think about it in that perspective, right, who benefits from that in the end? The customers benefit from that, right? If funding is directed to those programs and projects that derive the most customer benefits, and other projects are not done, that just drives efficiency around the process. So at the end of the day, customers benefit from going through that process.
Sure. We are last couple of minutes. If Jim, you want to do the closing remarks?
Sure. Thanks, Jamin. Thanks for fielding those questions and sorting through them for us. But first, I'd like to thank Andrew and Jason for joining us here today. We've journeyed through this process with these guys. We're starting that process here with Jason and team. I also want to thank David for joining us and bringing the insight around the details associated with value frameworks, value models, value measures, and things. It's a great partnership. We think we complement each other in the sense that BV brings the industry expertise to it. Copperleaf brings a robust enterprise-wide platform to do this work across all facets of the business. And David touched on this calibration across different business units and consequences. That becomes pretty powerful in the end, and it also, no matter what business you're in, either utility business or outside the utility business, it allows decision making on investments to be data driven, and it allows those investments to be aligned with the objectives of the company. So we think that's a really strong partnership and a strong way to do business. And just want to thank everybody for joining us, and hopefully we can get to talk more. So with that, that's all we have.
Thanks, Jim, and thanks, panel. And attendees, thank you for participating today. As you log off, please take a moment to complete our survey and give us your feedback. Thank you so much for attending. This concludes today's presentation.